Okay, I would like to now summarize what I've been talking about, these two changes, the value change and identity change, and use some graphic ways to demonstrate this. If you recall, what I've been saying pretty much, especially in the latter part of the latter segment, has been that the appearance of nationalistic tendency, this attachment to nation and to state, in the Middle East, and in fact we can say much of the third world, you can account for its appearance in terms of combination of two major and complementary political trends in the world. The trends have been really gaining strength for many years, so we're looking at something that has been building over the years. The first trend really began in Western Europe during the 18th century, and later on expanded throughout the world in the 20th century, embracing the entire globe. This trend has been a trend toward mass politics. Probably the best way I can illustrate this is through the use of what I call political participation pyramid. If you look at this slide, you notice that triangle. Imagine that represents the public in any given state or in any given nation. And when only about 5 to 10% of the population is what we call politically participant, meaning that they have the inclination to have the expectation from their government to provide them with some basic services. They expect the government to have education, to have be able to defend the nation, to be able to provide opportunities for advancement, and so on and so forth. That's what we mean by political participation. And I should point out, in America, we are kind of myopic about political participation. We tend to think purely in a narrow terms of voting. What I'm really talking about is not that. You could be politically participant in a dictatorial regime that doesn't allow anyone to vote. So what political participation really denotes is your inclination, your predisposition to have these expectations from government, and when those expectations are not fulfilled, to be willing to challenge. So if you have a politically participant society and government consistently fails, you may get a revolution on your hand. So when a country is at the level of 5 to 10%, just the top veneer of the population is considered to be politically participant, that's your classical definition of pre-mass political society. Another way of thinking about mass politics is to look at that line as it progressively goes down toward the base of the triangle. When it reaches somewhere about 80 to 90%, then you have what we call mass politics. And mass politics is easy for Americans and Europeans to understand. That is the nature of our politics. 80 to 90% are politically participant. In any society, somewhere between 10 to 20% of the population, no matter what happens, they will never participate. So if this was a course on, I will talk more, let me put it this way, I will talk more about it later because I don't want to get sidetracked with the 20% that are non-participant. But these 5 to 10% veneer, when the society is characterized by that, it's called pre-mass politics. So when this line goes somewhere in the 80 to 90%, then you have mass politics society. And the proposition, of course, is that when that happens, traditional elites going to have a very tough time to control the population with the old values. Population will no longer acquiesce in the decision of the traditional leaders and traditional elites who want to treat them as if the country was in a pre-mass politics stage. And they will instead get challenged. And sometimes when that happens, you may have to resort to censorship so that the public will not be aware of what's going on. On the other hand, here's a good way to understand how pre-mass politics society is different from mass politics. In a pre-mass politics society, you don't need censorship because people are, for the most part, unaware of what's going on anyway. And their expectations are very, very minimal. They just want to be left alone in their villages. So that's a big difference. That's a huge change. The second trend really reflects a change or a shift in political identity. And that shift, if you recall, we said it's moving away from a parochial identity, such as the extended family, such as your village, such as the clan, to a larger communities. Some of these larger communities can actually be described as nations. And that change, if I can capture it, think of it in the following sequential order. Identity change will lead to predisposition to political participation. If you no longer view your identity as your village and you begin to have an attachment to a larger community, oftentimes the nation, now you're beginning to wonder whether or not this nation, what's happening to this nation, and your attachment means that if you're not happy with the status of your nation, then you will do something about it. You're now inclined to participate. The other change, of course, as your identity shifts to this larger community nation, is the phenomena of nationalism. And these two are truly related. They are reinforcing of each other. And these changes that take place, for example, the change from being inclined to participate, it means now public opinion is something that the leaders have to take account of. So the emergence of public opinion is very important element of that transition to mass politics from pre-mass politics. Another way of looking at pre-mass politics, in a pre-mass politics, public opinion really doesn't exist because the identities are parochial. In a mass political society, the identities are with the nation and the public opinion is a very significant factor. Together, nationalism and this predisposition to political participation leads to mass politics. So a mass political society will have these characteristics. So going back to the two trends to sum up, as a direct consequences of these two changes, value change and identity change, we have seen these two trends, the appearance of mass politics and the behavioral manifestation of the identity change, nationalism, taking place. Now, I want to caution you before I end, and that is, if you see nationalism has an arrow to mass politics, that does not mean that mass politics is necessarily is going to be imbued with nationalism. Mass politics, think of it this way, is a necessary but not a sufficient condition for nationalism. It depends on whether or not you're a nation state or a non-nation state. Let me give you an example. The former Soviet Union was certainly a mass political society, but it really was not a nationalistic one because it was not a nation state. Each of the 15 republics that made up the Soviet Union, their identity and their attachment was not with this abstract entity, Soviet Union. It was with their respective republic. Russians were nationalistic as Russians. The Georgians were nationalistic as Georgians, and so forth and so on. So just because you have mass politics, that doesn't mean necessarily you're a nation state and necessarily you will be nationalistic.